I woke up in a white room. The ceiling, walls, and floor were all painted in a cold, sterile white that hurt my eyes. A sharp smell of antiseptic hit my nose. My head was pounding as if I had been struck with something heavy, and my tongue was so dry it felt like I had eaten sand. I tried to move but realized my hands and feet were strapped to the bed. Panic surged through me instantly. I struggled, but the straps wouldn't budge. "What the hell?" I croaked, but my voice sounded hoarse and weak. The door creaked open and a woman in a white coat entered. Her face was blank, indifferent, as if she had long since stopped seeing people. Only bodies, patients, objects. "You're awake," she stated dryly. "How do you feel?" "Where am I?" I tried to wriggle free from the straps, but to no avail. "Ward 18, St. Mary's Clinic. Calm down, Mr. Vlasov, or I'll have to sedate you." The clinic? St. Mary's? I had never heard of it. My mind was blank, no recollection of how I had gotten here. The last thing I remembered... Damn, what did I even remember? "I want to make a call," I demanded. "I have a family." The woman wrote something in her notebook and only then responded. "You have no one, Mr. Vlasov. The documents state that you are here completely alone." I opened my mouth to argue, but the words stuck in my throat. What if she was right? What if I really was alone? The first night was pure terror. The room was locked from the inside, but I could hear sounds outside the door. Creaking footsteps, distant screams, strange tapping as if someone was scratching the walls with their nails. I tried to sleep, but every time I drifted off, a strange low hum came from beneath the floor. And then the first scream rang out. I jerked up in bed. It was a wild, animalistic howl, full of pain and horror. It came from somewhere on another floor, but it was so loud it echoed in my head. Then came the silence. A deep, suffocating silence. In the morning, I asked the nurse about the screams, but she only smiled, as if I were a child scared of the dark. "You must have imagined it, Mr. Vlasov. It's just your mind playing tricks on you." But I knew it wasn't my imagination. The nights became torture. Every night, someone screamed. Sometimes it was a man's voice, sometimes a woman's, sometimes something inhuman. Every morning, I saw covered stretchers being wheeled down the corridor, and the remaining patients sat in the cafeteria with empty eyes, like puppets with their strings cut. "They kill someone here every night," an old man whispered to me one day as we sat opposite each other at the table. "But no one talks about it. No one wants to be next." I swallowed hard. "Who's doing the killing?" The old man glanced around, then leaned in closer. "Them. The doctors, the nurses. This isn't a hospital, boy, it's a slaughterhouse." I decided to escape. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay still in bed, holding my breath, waiting for the corridor to sink into thick, heavy silence. Somewhere far away, someone screamed again. But now, I knew I couldn't just lie there and listen. I had to act. I slipped out of the straps. They could be loosened if you knew how to pull. Then, slowly, almost soundlessly, I approached the door and listened. Silence. I cracked the door open and peeked outside. The corridor was empty, but the air smelled of blood. A flickering light further down the hall cast trembling shadows on the walls. I took one step, then another, and then I heard the rustling behind me. Turning, I saw them. Pale figures in white coats, their faces twisted in grimaces of madness, eyes black and hollow. They moved slowly but inevitably, their lips moving but making no sound. I ran, but I knew I wouldn't make it. Now I'm here, in this dark room. The door is locked, but I hear them coming. They know I've uncovered their secret. They won't let me leave. If anyone is reading this, run.
A night in the asylum. Every shift in the psychiatric hospital felt like walking on the edge of a knife, and I, as an experienced doctor, had long gotten used to it. But that night, the night that would change my life forever, began like any other shift. I had worked here for years, but I never got used to the silence. The patients, who had spent the whole day talking nonstop, were now eerily quiet, and that was strange, very strange. The chronic psychoses ward had always had a particular atmosphere. It housed the most severe cases, people who had lost touch with reality. Among them was one of my patients, Arthur, a man in his 40s who claimed that dark forces were after him. He was one of those people who never lost their vibrant, though insane, personality. When I peeked into his room, I found the bed empty. No Arthur. A cold chill ran down my spine as I returned to the medical desk. I found a few documents I wasn't supposed to see, investigations, notes, something resembling reports. They all pointed to one thing. Patients were disappearing. As I approached the desk, I felt a gentle touch on my hand. It was my colleague, Dr. Stevenson, a man I had always respected. He was older than me, smarter, with an impeccable reputation. "You don't look well, Dr. Smith," he said, eyeing me carefully. I noticed that his eyes had taken on a slightly sinister look, and his expression had grown somewhat tense. "Strange things are happening, Stevenson," I replied, unable to hide my concern. "Patients are disappearing. Arthur was here yesterday, and today, he's gone." Dr. Stevenson smiled, but his smile was strange. It's assumed that a doctor is someone who shouldn't be afraid, but at that moment I felt the growing tension, as though I had become a part of something that no one would tell me about. "It's just psychosis, doctor," he said calmly. "You're thinking too much. It's normal for this hospital." His words pierced me like the sharp edge of a knife. I decided not to let my concern go. That night, I began to notice something strange. Patients were disappearing from the rooms I visited, but instead of reporting it to the other doctors, I decided to act on my own. I began to watch Stevenson. With each passing night, his behavior became more and more odd. I noticed he often disappeared, returning through the empty hallways of the hospital like a ghost, as though he couldn't escape from something, and one night, as I walked down a dark corridor, I saw him. He was standing at the end of the hall, his figure shrouded in the half-light, but I could clearly see his face. He was holding something heavy in his hands, something strange, resembling a metallic object. In that moment, I realized he wasn't just a doctor. He was a killer. I hid behind a corner, trying not to make a sound. At that moment, I could hardly breathe. I watched as Stevenson slowly approached one of the rooms. He stopped in front of the door, listened. Then, with a predatory grin on his face, he quietly entered. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, but my instincts told me one thing: I had to stop him. But how? A couple of minutes later, I heard horrid sounds. First a scraping, then silence. I knew something horrible was happening. I couldn't just stand there and wait, I had to act. I snuck up to the room's door and peeked inside. There was Arthur, dead. Blood running down his face, his eyes bulging from their sockets, his body mangled. And standing next to him was Stevenson, holding that same metallic object, covered in blood. He saw me. I froze, unable to move. His eyes, filled with madness, met mine. For a moment, everything around us seemed to stop, and I understood he was going to kill me. But not so fast. I bolted in an instant, cursing myself for being so weak. My legs wouldn't obey me, but eventually I managed to hide in one of the locked offices. I dialed 911, barely managing to speak through my fear. By the time the police arrived, Stevenson was already gone. I knew they would catch him. Finally, he was arrested, and everything I had gone through became a story that no one would believe. Oh, but don't forget, there's always something hidden behind the walls of a psychiatric hospital. And as long as I work here, I always feel that somewhere in the dark corridors, something is lurking, waiting to return.
The shadow of the old asylum. I got a job as a night watchman at an old psychiatric hospital on the outskirts of town. The place had been abandoned for years, but after many other facilities were closed down, the management decided to reopen it. At first, I thought it was just an old building with crumbling walls and empty corridors, a place long forgotten by time. But I quickly realized that there was something else here, something not quite alive. The night shifts were the longest and the most monotonous. There wasn't a single soul in the building except for me. Time seemed to drag on, and the shadows, as if waiting for something, seemed to follow my every move. I got used to it. But everything changed one night when it felt like the building itself had started to breathe. The evening began like any other. Several hours passed quietly until midnight struck. The corridors grew even quieter, as if the building had swallowed all sound and light. I sat at the desk in the small security room staring at the monitor screens. Then, I saw it. A shadow dart across one of the cameras. At first I thought it was just a glitch, but when the shadow appeared again, I sighed and stood up, heading toward the area where it had been spotted. The hallway was empty, nothing out of the ordinary. I went back to my room and shut the door, trying to convince myself it had been just a trick of the light, but deep down I knew something was off. Then, something strange happened. A sense of unease began to creep over me. I stood up and decided to take a quick trip to the bathroom at the end of the corridor. It wasn't anything special, but in that moment, I needed to get away from that eerie feeling that seemed to cling to me. When I returned, something had happened inside the hospital. The lights in the hallways had dimmed and then suddenly went out entirely. All the security cameras turned off. I remembered how clearly I had seen the monitors when I left. Now, they were just dark screens, unresponsive to any attempt to reset them. I stepped out into the hallway trying to figure out what was going on, but what I saw threw me into a panic. All the rooms were empty. No patients, no staff, just an absolute void. I ran through the halls shouting, but there was no sound. The entire building seemed to have been swallowed by a deep, unearthly silence. In a blind panic, I ran toward the main door, hoping maybe I had missed something, that this was some kind of misunderstanding. But when I got there, I realized the door was boarded up from the inside. I desperately tried to find another way out, but every hallway, every door, led only to more darkness. The whole place was a maze, locked and suffocating. I was trapped. And that's when I understood something unexplainable had happened in this place, something that had turned it into a prison for the dead, or for those trapped between worlds. Minutes later, I heard a rustling sound behind me. I turned around and saw figures moving down the corridor, faintly lit by a dim, almost otherworldly glow. They weren't people. They were faceless shapes, slowly advancing toward me. I froze. One of them stepped closer, stopping right in front of me. We stood face to face, but I couldn't see its face. I took a step back, but as soon as I moved, they began to move with me, blending into the shadows. I ran as fast as I could, but they kept chasing me. I could feel their cold fingers reaching out as if they were about to drag me into the darkness. And just when I thought they would catch me, I woke up, lying in my bed, drenched in sweat, heart pounding in my chest, with that strange feeling that something was still there. Something was watching me. I glanced at the clock, 3:47 a.m. Everything was just as it had been before the nightmare, but that feeling, that I wasn't alone, lingered. That's when I realized what I had experienced wasn't just a dream. Somehow, in the middle of that night, I had been there, in that otherworldly place, in that hospital. The nightmare had been a warning, and perhaps I wasn't the only one who had ever walked out of that place alive.